Several of the biggest clubs in England want a new striker this summer, and it seems that Arsenal have pivoted their interest to Sporting CP's prolific Swede, Viktor Gyokeres. But is he the right fit for Mikel Arteta's side? Here to break that down is Jon Mackenzie, JJ Bull and James McNicholas. James, let's come to you first, as you and David effectively broke this news. What is the latest on this situation?
Oh, I've always got to be careful what I say because the aggregators are always watching. The latest is simply what we've said, which is that Arsenal have developing a strong interest in Gyokeres ahead of the summer transfer window. That is noteworthy because although Arsenal's need for a number 9 has been long-standing, it's kind of an open secret in football, he's not a name that's been particularly high on their list. Obviously, they're aware of him. They're aware of his goal-scoring exploits in Portugal. They've tracked him like a number of forwards, but other names have taken precedence until this point. Yeah. So what's changed? I mean, the main change is the change in sporting director. Andrea Berta, who has just started his role officially as the club's new sporting director, replacing Edu. He is a long-standing admirer of Gyokeres. And ahead of the summer transfer window, he is one of the names that I think Berta is putting forward to be in strong consideration for Arsenal's transfer strategy this summer. And there is a certain logic to it, right? This is a guy who is a proven goal scorer, certainly in Portugal at any rate, who has played in England before with Coventry, and is one of the premium strikers out there on the market in a summer in which there's a number of big clubs looking. So it's fascinating, really. I'm really curious to see if it develops any further. The price point as well could be in Arsenal's favour. He's got a guy with a £100 million euro release clause, but there's some indications from Portugal that Sporting may be able to sell at a lower price, or willing to sell, I should say, at a lower price this summer. And that brings him very firmly onto Arsenal's radar. So in those coming weeks where Mikel Arteta and Andrea Berta sit down to discuss number 9s, we expect Gyokeres to be high on the agenda. Yeah, interesting. And before we get into his tactical fit for Arsenal, I think a lot of fans will want to know, what does this mean for their pursuit of other players in this position? Yeah, I mean, look, it's still a live case, and it'd be wrong to say Arsenal are buying Gyokeres or the decision is made. Not at all. What we're reporting is that his name is coming to the fore at this point in time, but there are still other names in there. We've spoken for years about Arsenal's interest in Benjamin Sesko of Red Bull Leipzig. They've tracked him for a long, long time, done a lot of work in preparation there, watching him live at games, building relationships. There were discussions last summer about a potential move, but ultimately he chose to stay in Germany. And I would expect him to be part of those conversations as well. That's not as if that's gone away at all at this point in time. Alexander Isak of Newcastle United, that's a name that will always keep coming up, much to the annoyance, I'm sure, of any Newcastle fans unfortunate enough to be watching this video right now, because they go mad about Arsenal and Liverpool saying, "Oh, we quite fancy Isak," because their position is the same as the Newcastle ownership. He's not for sale, right? And that's the difficulty. If Mikel Arteta could pick any striker right now in world football, it would be Isak. But it's a much more complicated deal than that. And even if it were to happen, an exorbitantly expensive one. And then you've got somebody like Ollie Watkins. Arsenal looked at him in January. I think that was sort of a circumstantial interest in some respects. The chance to sign Watkins was presented to them at a point where Aston Villa knew they were going to have to sell one of their 2 centre-forwards, John Duran being the other, to help deal with their PSR situation. Arsenal were interested. They liked the idea of Watkins, particularly at a point in the season where, they looked very, very light up front. So they explored it. Ultimately, it didn't happen. Duran left the club. Watkins stayed, has continued doing what he's been doing for some time, scoring goals and playing pretty well for Aston Villa. Will Arsenal revisit it? I'm not so sure on that one, simply because I think the age of the player could come into consideration. Coming from a Premier League club, being an England international, there's probably still a bit of a premium on his price tag. So I would expect these other names maybe to figure more prominently in their thoughts. Okay. But I don't think you can ever count out a player like Watkins entirely, just because Mikel Arteta has shown in the past he loves a Premier League proven player. Yeah. Look at his big purchases: Kai Havertz, Declan Rice, Ben White, David Raya, all players who have played and proven in the Premier League. Jorginho, another case in point, where again he went for a more experienced option. So in a summer where they'll probably lose Jorginho, lose Thomas Partey, could they consider a Watkins? I wouldn't rule it out entirely, but I think Sesko, Isak, and of course Gyokeres would be the names I'd be considering most strongly at this point in time.
There we have it, don't rule them out. But let's put them to one side just for a second to bring it back to Gyokeres, JJ, because he's been on fuego this season, which is fire. Why?
Well, I think Viktor Gyokeres is a very good striker, but what Arsenal need, I would say, is an elite player to come in and make them better, because they're already very good. And I put it to you that there was a conundrum, because I think Viktor Gyokeres is an elite striker, but he also isn't.
Well, that clears that up.
And I'm going to tell you why. Now, if we look at his numbers, they're very, very good. He scored 85 goals and has 26 assists in 96 games. That's a lot of goals. 85 and 96 for Sporting. That's from Transfermarkt. And you can just see his numbers. He scores above his expected goals an awful lot. That's a good way of telling whether he's really good or not. But scoring that many goals anywhere is very, very impressive. And you can judge what players are good and who are elite by looking at underlying numbers versus real numbers, because to be a really good striker, you have to generate a lot of at least expected goals. The very best do that a lot. Look at Dembele there. He's creating all sorts of goals. But the very best, the most elite ones, score over it. Yes, Chris?
Where is he on this list, JJ?
Well,
or graph, I should say.
Viktor Gyokeres is not on this graph because he plays in Portugal, which is not one of the top 5 leagues, and that is very relevant.
Okay.
You see, there are certain things that Gyokeres does that make him much better, I think, in Portugal. For example, here he is on the left wing. He does this quite a lot. And a lot of Gyokeres' goals, if you go through them, there's a lot of penalties. It's not stat padding, I would say, but he scores a lot of penalties. He is always in these positions here. Here he is on the left wing, does a bit of work, and he gets into the middle of the box to shoot. The goalkeeper should probably save this, the defender should probably stop him as well. But he does this a lot. He starts out wide, gets into the middle. Here's another example. He's out wide again, running into space, the direct pass to him. That's another common thing he gets. He gets to the box, he goes into the middle, and he shoots in the middle of the box. That's another thing he does an awful lot. And again, I think people could stop him here. And you can see, this is runs in the Champions League. So we can't track data in Portugal because we don't really have it. So you have him making lots of runs wide on either wing. That's what you've got. That's what he does an awful lot of. Not a lot through the middle of the pitch, which is where he would be playing if he went to Arsenal. Now, a good way to assess players, I know it's not ideal, is looking at Football Manager, because they have scouts, a worldwide network, and they validate everything. So you can largely trust a lot of what they do, but you can't take it verbatim. Now, if you look at his Football Manager stats, a couple of things jump out to me. So this is from the last game 24, so there's a year behind, right? But his technical stats, I don't think, are that of an elite striker. What you see is his finishing. So when you watch him play live, his finishing is amazing. He's really, really good at it, and he shoots with all sorts of power, and he's good at penalties as well. But his technical stuff, I don't think he's an elite dribbler. I don't think he's an elite. His first touch, I don't think is that great. His mental stuff, he's clearly very determined. He's aggressive when he plays, and he works really hard. He tramples over people. He's got the elite mentality. He likes Cristiano Ronaldo. That's his sort of thing. He wants to be the best. Very individually determined minded. That's a word. We'll go with that.
I was actually heavier than Gyokeres when I got back from my honeymoon, so that's made me feel
Well, then
pretty bad about myself.
Will you be amazing in Portugal then? So what you have here is acceleration, natural fitness, stamina and strength. Exactly what you're saying. These are the most important things, really, I think, to look at Gyokeres. He is an absolute machine. He's like a monster kind of man who can come in and run past or into and through players in Portugal. Because then it becomes a little bit different when you look at why he might not be quite as prolific in the Premier League. Does that apply in England?
Okay.
You've played football in England before, haven't you? Do the players like it when you're weedy and agile?
No, they're rough and ready.
Correct.
JJ.
Here is Viktor Gyokeres playing in the Champions League again.
Right.
So this is a good leveler, right? Against Sturm Graz. Are they good? I don't really know. Here they are attacking down the left wing, I should say Sporting are. And what you're going to see, obviously, where do you think Gyokeres is going to be in this next slide?
Based on what you've told me, wide.
He's on the left. Here he is, running onto the ball, coming into the left. Now, a couple of things to note from this, right? Lots of space he's run into, so that's good. He's stretching the defence, really useful for an attack, especially when you're using a direct counter-attack. But like when you look at Gyokeres, what I think you see is a player who has learned to be really good. He's worked very hard to get very good. So like you see here, he's doing exactly what you should do. He's getting his arm across it, using his body to make sure he can shield the ball, the defender can't get around him. And you can, if I zoom in, you can see it a bit better, right? So his arm's around him, about to elbow in the chin, but he's basically guarding the ball. That's what you want to do in this situation, so you've got it. Now the defender, I think, has to try and get round the other side because the danger is towards the goal. The danger is not him going backwards. And I think the defender should know this. But he tries to sort of steal in towards it while Gyokeres is shielding it. So the X is meant to be that he's not meant to go this way, and the yellow arrow is meant to be where he should try and show him. He wants the ball to go that way. That's what I was trying to say with that badly designed graphic. However, when you go into the next thing, he creates separation because he's led in one way, he gets the other, and you can push the ball past him. He's now clean through. So this is great. So I think the first point here is that the defender should probably have blocked him from making this run. That's the first thing they should have done, and I think a Premier League defender would have done that. But when you get to this point here, he now cuts inside. He's got a lot of speed, a lot of acceleration, takes a little bit to get going. He's faster than he is over long distance, I think he is over short.
Right.
Because he's massive, it kind of makes sense, right? So here he is cutting inside. We know he likes doing that. That's what he likes doing. And here's the point. I think a Premier League defender gets into this here because his touch is not great. He doesn't push it. He's not protecting the ball with his touch. It goes too far wide. And this is one example, so I'm being really critical of him here. I think a better defender steals this. A stronger defender also does not get completely bodied out of the way by him when he just bumps into him. And I think that, again, probably doesn't happen. A fullback would get bodied, but I don't think... Like Van Dijk, for example, I know it's an extreme example, just doesn't get bodied in that way.
But this run indicative of how a better Premier League level defender might have dealt with him here.
Yeah, I think so. And there's loads of examples. This is just one, and this is the thing. And he gets into the box, and then again, another defender comes across. I think they should steal the ball here, but he doesn't step in. And you can see by the time he's put it in the back of the net, the defender is looking completely opposite way. And I think, again, you can probably read that better. Super harsh. I'm not an elite level footballer or even good at it, but I think there are certain things, if you're coaching, that Premier League defenders would do better in these situations. I think the most accurate way to describe what Gyokeres does well is to look at the game Mario Kart.
Of course, why would you not?
Well,
why would you not?
If we were to then distribute the attributes from a footballer and apply them to Mario Kart, speed, strength, balance, good and tight spaces, I think if you looked at all the characters available to you, Gyokeres is actually Donkey Kong. Very slow to build up. When you get there, he's unstoppable. So if it's a big straight line, you just can't deal with him. And that's like him playing in Portugal. He's so good at lots of other things, but he's got that real strength. High work rate and aggression. Unstoppable when in full stride. Lacks subtlety. He's not Bowser, he's a bit slower. But that's why he is Donkey Kong. And I think this is really relevant because when we look at another player Arsenal has been linked with, Benjamin Sesko, I'd say he's a more rounded player. Now, his goals aren't as high. He's not quite as exciting a prospect just in the data alone. 36 goals, 8 assists in 80 games, also in Transfermarkt, but he's only 21 years old. Now, I think it's interesting to look at Sesko because James was saying like they've been linked with him forever. I wonder whether Gyokeres might be a bit of a smokescreen because they actually really want to get this guy in. But I'm going to look at why he's an all-rounder and why it makes sense to me and what benefits you get from this as opposed to what Gyokeres brings to the table. So Sesko is about 6'4". He's also massive, but he doesn't have the same like power, momentum, sort of. He's a bit more well-rounded. His off-ball and technical abilities, I think, are also much more conducive to what Arsenal would want as well. Here he is. So he was next to the defender. He's dropped away from the defender to create a bit of space to offer a bounce pass because the next pass can either go into one of these two players here or he could, in theory, turn and just keep the move going. That's what he does. Gyokeres doesn't really do this. When he does drop in, his first touch isn't never that great, I think. But these are the options that Sesko's giving him. Now, the ball goes out wide. We're attacking on the left-hand side here. So now we know where Sesko is. He's going to make a run towards the box because that's where you score goals. He's going to make the first run that like anyone decent like Haaland would make, where you make a run towards the front post. The defenders predict this and anticipate it, and they also know he's doing it. So they go that way. He corrects and goes to the back post and uses his height to get on the end of a cross to the back post. So he's read the play really well. He's used all his like technical and movement and everything you need to get to the goal to score a header. What's relevant about this to me is that of his last 68 goals, Gyokeres has only scored one with his head, which is interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Very, yeah. Especially given how much Arsenal focused on crosses, towards the back post and things like that. It makes it. I think there'd have to be a stylistic change to suit Gyokeres, really.
Well, I totally agree, and I also think that he plays through the middle, right? So when you want to make runs, you probably want to make runs through the middle because you would have Martinelli on the left, maybe Saka on the right. So if you're running through the middle, like here he is against Atletico Madrid. So he's right in the circle here. He's going to keep running, and you can see he's got the speed. He is mobile, so he can power away. And he's taking all these players with him. He gets all the way to the other side of the box. He moves it out wide. The shot goes into the box, and he ends up scoring a header. Another header that he scores because he's got the power. And again, we know that Arteta likes physical players like this. But when you look at his runs, this is with data. This is in the Champions League. Remember what Gyokeres' runs looked like very much on the sides. He is running through all sorts of the pitch. So I think you can do more with him. You've got more options with a player like Benjamin Sesko. But also what's relevant is that because he's got this big powerful frame, you might not think he's very good technically in small tight spaces, but he is. He's playing for Slovenia here. What you see is great control in tight spaces. He scores from this position here. I don't think anyone should do this. And he doesn't do it by powering it through players. He does it by drawing people towards him, skipping past them with clever skill, little burst of pace, drawing players into exactly an area where he wants to go, nipping past them with a bit of skill.
At what point does he score here? It looks less and less likely with every screenshot.
He clips it over the keeper here.
Lovely.
It's a lovely finish. It's a very Arsenal goal, I think.
Guile.
Lovely speed, a bit of power, but clever play and technique.
So is he more round peg for round hole?
Well, this is actually a good question because I think he's not a specialist. He's a great all-rounder. He's got a good goal tally. He doesn't stand out like Mbappe or Haaland. They've got different physical threats. Mbappe's really fast. Haaland's very powerful. Lewandowski's a great goal scorer. He knows what to do. I say he's more rounded. I would say that Benjamin Sesko is Mario. He's more of the well-rounded player.
We're back at Mario Kart.
You can play him in any of the different tracks and it would work. He's got all the different bits and pieces you need. He's kind of all well-rounded, but he's not perfect and not skewed to one particular direction.
Really good at plumbing as well.
He's very good at plumbing too, yes.
All I can think about is Mikel Arteta and Andrea Berta sat in the office at London Colney playing Mario Kart as they tried to decide which striker to sign.
John, JJ talking about a lot of elite strikers there, and I think a lot of Arsenal fans are thinking and feeling like an elite striker is the missing piece of the puzzle. But do you think Gyokeres is the right piece?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think it then goes both ways, right? It's not just is this player good enough, is this player good enough for this club? So I've set myself up a few questions thinking about Gyokeres to Arsenal just to help us kind of quantify and qualify whether or not we think he's going to be the right player for them right now. So the first one, will his output scale up into the Premier League? I think this is an interesting question because we've already asked it before, because Viktor Gyokeres, as you remember, was playing in England, playing in the Championship, moved to Portugal, and the big question was he's going from Coventry in the Championship to Sporting in Portugal. Sporting are one of the top 3 teams. That means that they're going to be dominant in games. So that means they're going to come up against a lot of teams who are going to sit a little bit deeper against them. They're going to be low blocks. And given everything that JJ said about him, this is a guy who's obviously a big space attacker. Like, he loves to be able to be given the freedom to attack those large spaces. Maybe questions about how he's going to perform in tighter spaces when teams are sitting deep, blocking out, trying to make it hard for the opponents to score.
Yeah, well, when I was watching that, what JJ was showing there, as someone who watches Arsenal week in, week out, I was thinking, wow, look at all that space. Like, so rare that you see Arsenal players running into those areas. So it would be a massive shift for him.
Yeah, I think so. So the question was he going to be able to perform in Portugal? And the answer was actually yes, he was. We've seen the numbers, incredible numbers. And for me, the question is, well, why then was he able to do that? Was it because he was suddenly able to adapt to playing small space football, or was it something else? And as JJ said, I think the answer to that is his physicality. He was so dominant in that league that he was able to still bulldoze even in those low blocks. So for me, asking the question about whether or not we can scale him up to another league, the Premier League, the question has to be, is his physicality so outlier that he's going to be able to continue to have that kind of impact in the games? And I think it's pretty clear from what JJ has been saying in that section, it's probably not the case that he's going to just fit straight into the Premier League and be able to play the way he's playing and get away with some of the things that he's able to get away with elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, a great example is obviously he came up against Arsenal not too long ago. Gabriel and William Saliba, who are maybe, again, a bit like Van Dijk, they're an extreme in terms of how good they are, but you could see that they were able to contain him in a way that many defences in the Portuguese league wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. So first question, will his output scale up into the Premier League? Question marks about that. Second question, would he have helped Arsenal score more goals this season? Now that might sound like a weird question, but what I'm getting at here is, if we take Arsenal as they are now, tactically, the way that they're trying to create goals, and you throw Viktor Gyokeres into that team, do Arsenal score more goals? Are they more dangerous at what they do? And to answer that question, I spent some time yesterday.
Oh, I love it. I smell a John Thought experiment.
Well, I watched all of Arsenal's goals a few times just to get a sense of, well, what is it? How is it that Arsenal are creating goals? Here's the headline, facts.
He rehearsed that.
Arsenal scored 55 goals so far this season in the Premier League. I've just looked at the Premier League because I think if he's going to fit into the Premier League, he'll fit anywhere else. So,
right.
and also I think Arsenal have scored a lot more goals or a lot higher goal figures outside of the Premier League as well, right? We've seen 7 goals scored in some games, etc. So this is a nice indicator of what Arsenal are up to. 55 goals, of which 41 open play goals. Now I know that Arsenal, people love to talk about Arsenal and set pieces. They've scored 14 set pieces this season. So yeah, I think maybe that would surprise people. That's 25% of their goals, which I guess is a big-ish chunk. 2 of those were penalties. 1 was from a free kick, not direct, because as James knows, Arsenal don't score direct free kicks. And yeah, 11 I think were from corners. So that's the set pieces. But I think what's really interesting about the open play goals, so 41 open play goals, is that 26 of them are from the wide channel. Now we've talked a lot about how Arsenal like to operate in those areas. They get the ball into those areas and try and create from there. So 63% of their open play goals came from the wide area. So when we're already thinking about Viktor Gyokeres, the question is, how is he going to fit into a system where goal creation is coming from the wide areas. Now, we've talked a lot about how Gyokeres likes to operate in the wide areas. Arsenal want their striker to be in the middle when their other players are creating from those wide areas. So already we're trying to think of, well, this guy's going to be in the box, he's going to have centre-backs on him. Often because Arsenal are building up quite slowly and patiently, there's not going to be much space there because the opposition have time to fall into their low block, etc. The only other thing to consider, I think, with Gyokeres then is, we've been talking about like these direct attacks that he's really dangerous in. Actually going through the goals that Arsenal have scored, they do actually score quite a few from fairly direct attacking scenarios. So 8 of those goals came from direct attacks, by which I mean essentially the opposition are running back, the space to attack. It's sort of maybe a quick transition turnover. So there are goals that are being created in that way. But the other thing that's really important about Arsenal, we know that they're one of the best out of possession teams in the world. One of the byproducts of that is that you do create high turnovers, which can then become quite dangerous attacking scenarios. So 10 of the goals this season have come directly from those kind of turnovers, because Arsenal are so good at winning the ball up in that sort of final third area, sort of high regain, we would call it. So I was saying, well, Gyokeres he would add to them, I think, in those kind of areas. But then I was thinking about it and I was like, well, we're not just trying to find out whether or not Gyokeres could do the things that Arsenal are already doing quite well. Because I think Arsenal are pretty good anyway, attacking in those more open spaces. The issue with Arsenal is that they don't create those moments enough, right? So the question is always like, breaking down low blocks, are they efficient enough? When it comes to these more direct attacks, I actually think they've got some really good players who can thrive in those scenarios.
You said it in passing, and I found it really interesting that actually you think Kai Havertz is really good in these situations.
Well, I'll throw this to James, because I think when I think of the goals that Kai Havertz scores, a lot of them are in those sort of scenarios where he runs in behind, or he's doing a supporting run with another player who's running behind, and he often will score. I think he's pretty dangerous in those areas where sometimes when he gets like a tap in, he can miss. But I think when it's open play, direct attacking, he's often pretty good when he gets into one-on-one scenarios with goalkeepers.
That's true, actually. Yeah, I think when he's played in on goal, his record's pretty decent. Sometimes it's when he receives it in more crowded spaces, I think he struggles to get the good contact on the ball. But I'm a little bit surprised at how many of those direct attack goals there are. What I would say is, anecdotally, my experience watching Arsenal is they're so good at those high regains. They're so good structurally that it feels like they could capitalise on that perhaps even more than they currently do.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing is that I think they're very good from these scenarios. So they're very efficient. They score them when they create them. The issue is that they don't create them enough.
Right.
That's not something that I think Gyokeres is going to add to.
Yeah, okay.
I think he would just be another player who would be very good in those sorts of scenarios. And that's not really the question that we're asking, because we're asking, would he have increased the amount of goals they scored this season? And I think that's why the headed goals aspect is so interesting here. We've talked about how he's only got 1 headed goal in 68 most recent goals. And I think this is one reason why Šeško makes the obvious fit for Arsenal, because I think if you throw Gyokeres into this Arsenal team this season, the goal tally probably isn't that much different from what it is now, in terms of if Arsenal play the way that they've played tactically this season. I think if you throw Šeško in there, they probably create more goals because he has that threat from aerial presence in the box from wide areas.
So is the question here, John, wouldn't they change the way they play to suit his skill set and thus get more overall?
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting question here. Like, what could Arsenal do with a player like Gyokeres to make them more dangerous? So that's my final question. So can he offer Arsenal tactical advantages that improve the way they create chances, so that they are creating more chances because the system is better, basically? And I think the best way of answering this question is thinking about another team who play very similar football to Arsenal, who made a very big decision in terms of the kind of striker they were going to play. And that's Man City with Erling Haaland, because as you remember, when Erling Haaland was brought to Manchester City, there was lots of questions about, is it not just going to change the way that Pep's football operates? Is this a misstep? We're used to them having these sort of false 9-y kind of forwards who drop out, create space for other players to run into. What's it going to be like having a power forward sitting in the middle there? What's going to happen? I think 3 years later, the answer to that question is that they have improved their goal scoring ability. I think when you have a player like Haaland, even this season, scoring over 20 goals, despite the fact that City have dropped off, there's clearly some kind of advantage to be able to play a player like that in a team like City, who are, I would describe as being positionally focused.
So are we asking here whether Viktor Gyokeres can be Arsenal's equivalent of Erling Haaland?
Yeah, and I think we're not just asking a general question here, because like surely every club wants to have their Erling Haaland, but Arsenal are trying to play football in a similar way that Man City are trying to play. What they're doing is they want to develop ball possession as a means of generating chances, but also stopping the opponent from having. They want to control games basically, and they're going to do that using what I would call positional advantages. What that means is that they're going to use the positions of their players to be able to create these passing lanes through opponents' lines of pressure, retain possession of the ball, and so a lot of it's about manipulating your opponents to create space to generate chances. So the big question is, if you bring in someone like Viktor Gyokeres, can he do the same sorts of things that Erling Haaland has proven that he can do at Manchester City? Now, I'm going to bucket one part of this, because one part of this is just Erling Haaland scores a lot of goals, right? And that's what he was brought in for. But Erling Haaland wasn't just brought in to score goals. He was also brought in to be a part of a team and help them to function the way that they do. And I think there's a number of different things that City do with Haaland, which makes it easier for them as a team to generate goals rather than just find the striker in the box and score. So I've got 3 examples of this, the ways that Pep Guardiola was able to implement Erling Haaland into his team, despite the fact that a lot of people felt that it was going against a lot of his ideas and principles. The first thing I want to talk about is how Erling Haaland is a really good way of being able to create space within a positional system. One of the things that I thought was really interesting at the beginning of Haaland's career was that whenever you watched games back, so you're watching Match of the Day, and the pundits would always be like, here's Erling Haaland, he's making a run. If they play this pass, he's in behind, and they're definitely going to score, right? Because every time you play that pass in behind, the goal is the result. What I think that they missed there was that this wasn't because City players were like, oh, I didn't see that run, I'm not used to looking for a player who runs in behind. It's that actually City use runs in behind in build-up as a really good way of generating space that you can then exploit. And I think that's one reason why Haaland is such a threat.
I really love this notion as Haaland as a space creator. I've never thought about him as that before.
Yeah, and the reason it works is because he creates a tension, right? Because you don't want him to get in behind, because he is a really dangerous goal scorer. He is a power forward in the same way that Viktor Gyokeres is. If he gets the ball in space, he's probably going to score like 1 every 2 times or something like that, if he generates these big one-on-ones with goalkeepers. So centre-backs have to track him. They can't not track him. They can't just leave him and gamble on the offside trap here. What that means then is those defenders get pulled out of the way, space is opened up, and then his teammates can exploit that space. Here's a really nice example of this. I've gone back to the 22-23 season because that's sort of the high point of City under Pep. City playing right to left here against Aston Villa. Kyle Walker's played the ball down the line. It's been cleared by a Villa player, and then Rodri's just going to do a first-time pass into Gundogan here in space. Gundogan is going to receive the ball. Villa are actually set up pretty nice defensively. They've got the 2 centre-backs nice and tight. They've got coverage of Haaland here. They've got a defensive midfielder here, and the 2 fullbacks have really nice access to their defensive teammates in that back line. What we can see here, though, is that immediately Haaland is making that run. So he's already making that powerful run in behind. You can see the centre-back here already pointing, saying we need to make sure we cover the space. The other centre-back, Mings, here is making that run to make sure that he's going to be covered. That's already going to be creating space. Because of this run, Gundogan can actually play the ball into Kevin De Bruyne, because I think this is camera here, he's come across, the space is opened out here. And what we end up with is this scenario here, where actually De Bruyne has got the ball between the lines, plenty of space. Kevin De Bruyne, one of the most creative players in the world. Erling Haaland, he's managed to go in behind, I think this is Konsa here, in the back line, with the possibility of playing through. You've got your 2 wingers either side of the fullbacks. This is just a really dangerous attacking scenario. And they've created that through the movement of Erling Haaland, pulling those defenders apart, making the space in the middle. These are the sorts of areas that you really need to be attacking if you want to be generating repeatable, good chances. So the question is, could Gyokeres do that for Arsenal? Now, I think yes, obviously, Gyokeres he's the same kind of player as Haaland, right? If he gets in behind, he's going to cause these problems. So they've got that tension. We've got to follow the striker here. It's going to open up space. The big question is, do Arsenal access these areas enough? Now, we've talked about this so much in the last few seasons. If you want an in-depth breakdown of Arsenal building centrally, watch our most recent show on Arsenal, because we talked about that at length. But for me, this is one reason why you can't just say, well, Viktor Gyokeres is going to fix all of the problems, because the problems aren't just creating space, it's accessing that space in the first place. Obviously, if he creates more space in there, it's going to help Arsenal access those areas, so it's possible. But I think this is one of those areas where actually there's a tactical aspect that Arteta and the team have to overcome in order to get the advantage
Unlocking
of them.
his strengths, right?
Yeah.
It helps to build up as well a bit. If you're being marked man to man, you've got the threat in behind, it means you can make that player run forward. It doesn't have to be someone as powerful as Gyokeres or Haaland or whatever, but then if someone does make that run, even Eddie Nketiah could have done it, it means that you've got that option which then pushes the opposition back, which gives you more space to build up in theory, especially in the middle if you stretch it.
Yeah, and it's why I wanted to make the point that it's important that the player that you have in that position is a dangerous player, because the less dangerous that player is, the less likely the centre-backs are going to be nervous about covering them, the less space they're going to create, right? The other thing that I think is important that Haaland does is hold-up play. And we've talked about hold-up play already with Gyokeres. Erling Haaland, I don't think is a particularly well-rounded striker in the way that we're talking about Isak or even Šeško, I think. The difference is that he can actually do enough for City in hold-up scenarios to, again, be able to generate these positional advantages for his team. So let's look at an example. The same game, Villa from 22-23. In this instance, the ball is played down the line and it's just fed round the corner into Haaland. And I think Gundogan is just off screen here, but apart from that, he's pretty isolated. Gundogan is behind him, so he can't find that first-time pass. Now, all Haaland has to do here is hold on to the ball long enough against the centre-back Mings here to allow his teammates the time and space to be able to start hitting some of these areas. So he holds it for probably less than 2 seconds. In that time, he can then find Bernardo Silva in space, but by doing so, they've now generated this positional advantage whereby Bernardo Silva can play the ball to Gundogan, who can feed it into the wing, and you've got, I think this is Kyle Walker now running down the side. They end up with this situation here, where actually Walker shoots. You could argue that there's better passing options on here, but this is, again, another really dangerous situation. The question is, do we think Gyokeres could do that? Well, I think, yeah, he could. I think that if Arsenal want a hold-up striker, he's definitely going to be able to do that well enough to the level that Haaland does, that it's workable. Again, the question is, to what extent are the strikers being found in those sorts of areas in order to hold the ball up? Does that require a tactical shift from Arsenal again?
I'd also argue, having watched a lot of Gyokeres this last 2 days, that I don't think his hold-up play is as good as, especially not as like Havertz, for example. So you want someone who can hold it up, you get more advantages from him, whereas Gyokeres, his passing is often not great as well as decision-making, so he'll maybe take the ball down with his first touch, but it bounces a little bit, and then his second touch is maybe not that good, or his passing goes to someone else. So it's not perfect, it does work.
Yeah. One final tactical aspect of the way that City have used Haaland really well, I think, and this has happened maybe more recently in the last couple of seasons. So the example I've got here is from the Chelsea game earlier this calendar year, when City actually ended up winning 3-1. When you have a player like Erling Haaland and a player like Gyokeres, again, these guys who are physical types, what you want to try and do is get them isolated in space so that they can exploit that space. Then you're happy to go long. So we've talked a lot about how managers like Pep and Arteta don't like to lose possession of the ball. But we're actually at a point with Guardiola where he's happy to maybe try to optimise those scenarios if he thinks that the trade-off is good. Okay. And the trade-off has to be, well, do we think that Erling Haaland is going to be able to come out on top of a 1v1 battle with a centre-back? Now, obviously Pep is going to prep for it better than that, because he's not just going to be like, well, we're just going to play long balls into Haaland and hope things work out. The team are going to then try and generate those advantages that they can mean that the needle swings in their favour in those scenarios. So this is a pretty nice example of a zonal defensive structure, right? It's basically a 4-4-2. The winger here is jumping up onto the ball. It's quite aggressive, perhaps. But across the back line, you can see that you've got a nice spread of defenders, and your midfield covering pretty nicely. That's the way that Chelsea are going to defend in certain scenarios, but when certain triggers are met, they're going to jump into a man-to-man phase to make it harder for City to possess the ball. One of those triggers is going to be a backwards pass. So in this scenario with City building up, what they actually do is they try and bait that man-to-man phase by playing it back to the goalkeeper. So they play the ball back to Ederson here, who then is really happy to just put his foot on the ball and bait the opponent in and say, come and get us. That's a trigger then for Chelsea to go man-to-man. So you can see everywhere around this pitch, it's just man-to-man. And once this happens, I think City recognise, well, we can manipulate the position of the opponents. We can actually move them into areas where we're actually able to generate these positional advantages. Because actually, if we look here, this is the defensive line of Chelsea with Trevor Chalobah taken out. And if you look at that now and think of the space in these terms, you've got Haaland in his own half, so he's onside, and he's 1v1 against Chalobah with literally the whole of the other half to aim at. No, there's no coverage of the other half really given by the defensive team. that's the sort of situation that Pep's like, I'm happy to go long here. Like that's a nice tactical trade-off. Will we lose the ball? Maybe, but there's a good chance that something good will come out of this.
And is that an option that Arsenal don't have at current, James?
Not to the same extent. Like if you imagine David Raya in possession there where Ederson is now, and the threat that Gyokeres would add maybe as that forward running in behind, I think that would add another dimension to their game. Havertz can do it, but I just think he doesn't carry the same level of kind of power and threat that maybe someone like Gyokeres could. Although there are so many unknowns, obviously, with the transition between the two leagues. And it would be really interesting to see Arsenal make more use of this kind of scenario. So that is one way in which he could definitely augment what they're doing in possession.
And maybe Havertz doesn't quite instill the same amount of fear that you're talking about with Haaland, John.
Yeah, perhaps not. But I think it's really interesting that even in this scenario, that Chelsea were happy to allow the 1v1 against the back line, because
want to be
when we look at we actually look at the moment where Ederson kicks the ball, you can see this is obviously something that they've worked on. They've talked about it at half-time and they've been like, they're going man-to-man. Let's just try and get Haaland into these scenarios where he's isolated, and Haaland, you be ready to go. As soon as that ball is played, Haaland's already moving, Chalobah is facing down the field. He's not in a really nice position here to actually match that momentum. And
a lot of space on the left to run into.
Yeah, and it ends up with this situation here. Now, Sanchez ends up being in a ridiculous position, so Haaland actually scores this chance. But even in this scenario, I think if you're able to get the advantage of knowing that your player will end up with the ball, bring other teammates into play, this is a really dangerous way of playing. It's one of the ways we saw actually City play in that 22-23 season at the end when Arsenal dropped away. And remember the 4-1 game? I don't want to bring up.
Well, they blew Arsenal away that day.
But they played really direct in that, right? The first goal was like actually Arsenal pressed them super well. Ederson plays the ball into John Stones. He's actually mad at Ederson when they've scored the goal, because he's like, why are you playing me into this amount of trouble? All he can do is play the ball long, and then it's a Haaland bounce pass into De Bruyne, who runs through and scores. That sort of direct play is great for a team like City, who have players like, at that point, De Bruyne towards the end of his pomp, but still roughly in his pomp, and Haaland, because you can attack with 2 or 3 players. Like, look at this instance here. You've got Foden, Gundogan, and Haaland. You're committing very few players forward. Your defensive system structure is really nice, but you're still able to generate goal-scoring situations. So make the most of your elite players in those kind of scenarios. And I think this is one area where Gyokeres, like you say, would add to Arsenal.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that occurs to me is you mentioned De Bruyne, and that partnership in that season, De Bruyne and Haaland, was so effective. But do Arsenal have supporting players like a De Bruyne to complement Gyokeres or a Haaland type forward in that way? Particularly in central areas? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and that's why I think we can answer that question. Can he offer Arsenal tactical advantages that improve the way they create chances? I think the answer to that has to be yes. But that's not just that. It's not him being the final piece of that puzzle. It's that there need to be changes as well made in the way that Arsenal play in order to get the advantages that he can offer too. And I think that's the really interesting question here, is how do Arsenal switch to be able to accommodate a striker to get the benefits of that striker? And that's a question I think only Mikel Arteta can answer. But I think for me, going through this process of thinking about Gyokeres to Arsenal, my sense of it is the same as JJ's, that they should aim for maybe a better rounded player. Like, Isak is the obvious option, right? Because he offers a little bit of all of this, right? He's a great hold-up player. He can be creative play in the same way that Gabriel Jesus is, dropping off the front line and creating space for his teammates to run into. He can head the ball well. He can function as a sort of traditional striker. That sort of, I think, flexibility probably adds more to Arsenal than just having a power forward who, yes, okay, he's going to give you certain tactical advantages, but that is going to have to come, I think, with the team improving the way that they're generating chances, more so than it would do if they put someone like Šeško, who's a great header of the ball, or Isak, who's a bit more elite at like every different area.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for goals, that the reason to bring in a striker is because you want more goals. I think Gyokeres would probably, from what I've seen of him and where I think all this applies, would probably end up with about 12 to 14 goals in a season in the league if you played every single week, and you would lose some of your tactical advantage from having another type of striker. But I think Havertz would get around about the same as well anyway. So are you really gaining more by putting in a different thing? And do you gain tactically by changing it in that way? Whereas, like if it's Isak, I think you don't have to change too much of what you're doing exactly, but you get the benefit of added tactical upside.
Good point, JJ. And over to a man now who makes several good points on a daily basis in his lovely newsletter, Phil Hay.
Arne slot. He's a tactical genius, right? Just look at Liverpool. surging towards the Premier League title. But even the finest coaches have episodes they'd rather forget, and we wrote about one of his this week, a ploy he tried to introduce while he was a player in the Netherlands with PEC Zwolle. In short, Slot's idea was to take the kick-off, hoof the ball as high as you could into the air, with a view to dropping it in the opposition box, feeding on the scraps, and scoring amid the chaos. You'll be shocked to hear that it didn't work, and even more surprised to hear that he's never dared try it since. Nobody's perfect, not even a Premier League boss. We bring you these stories daily in the Athletic FC newsletter. If you'd like to join us, sign up for free using the link below.
Okay, thanks, Phil. We discussed a lot of things on the pitch there, James, but obviously a lot has to happen off the pitch for this to become a reality. And I feel like we'd be remiss not to talk about Andrea Berta a little bit more, as Gyokeres is seemingly his guy. So what sort of operator is he? And what kind of relationship do you think he's going to have with Mikel Arteta? Because Edu seemed like Bezes with the Spaniard, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And Arsenal always viewed that relationship as a partnership. You know, I think conventionally in a lot of European clubs, the sporting director is kind of above the coach in the hierarchy. Not so at Arsenal. They saw them on a level, engaging in dialogue about players, and it was very, very collaborative. I expect it to be similar with Berta and with Arteta. You know, Arsenal, they interviewed for an Edu replacement. They haven't wanted to dramatically reimagine the role or anything like it. The job spec is the same. So I think they'll be engaged in pretty open discussions. What will be really interesting is like to what extent Berta is able to persuade Mikel Arteta. I mean, this is a guy who absolutely knows what he wants, and on certain transfers has been emphatic. You know, it has to be this guy, and if we have to push a bit further on the budget, then so be it. At this point in the project, and in this position in particular, what compromises is he prepared to make, and what influence is Berta going to have in swaying him? And for now, that is an unknown. But given Berta's experience, given the work he's done at Atleti, the part that he's played in bringing success to that club, winning league titles, qualifying for Champions League, reaching Champions League finals, you'd like to think Arteta will hear him out. So, very curious to see which way it goes with the number 9 position.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because he's largely become accustomed to getting what he wants. And
Totally.
all the players they've signed have been like players for now. So it'd be interesting to see if any more project players come through. But
yeah, and also with this number 9 position, you could argue they've kind of been kicking this can down the road for a while. I mean, we talk about Havertz as the incumbent for the position now, but he was actually really bought with the plan to play him in an advanced midfield role as a kind of supporting number 8. That changed halfway through the season. So Arsenal have needed this centre forward for some time. They hoped Gabriel Jesus would be the guy. Injuries have obviously prohibited that from happening. They might have addressed it last summer. They probably should have addressed it in January. Here we are the summer again. I think it's time they've got to commit. They've got to take the plunge on one of these guys. And Mikel Arteta can't afford, I think, to wait any longer for the perfect solution. I think there's probably going to have to be some compromise involved somewhere along the line.
Yeah. There's no striker in the youth ranks coming through, is there? Because I know there's a couple of like really clever, tidy players coming through.
There's some decent ones who've gone out the club. I mean, Arsenal have sold Balogun for good money. They sold Eddie Nketiah, Crystal Palace. Mika Biereth, who's doing really well. He was at Sturm Graz and he's now at Monaco. I think he scored 3 hat-tricks for them since January. But no, there's no one really behind that in the centre-forward position. Chido Obi-Martin was the sort of big hope within the academy, and he went to Manchester United. It's a strange situation, really, because if he'd stayed at Arsenal this season, he probably would have played a lot of games with all the injury problems they've had at number 9. It's funny how things pan out. But no, this is something they need to add. Havertz is going to miss most of pre-season, recovering from this hamstring surgery he's had. Gabriel Jesus, we don't expect back potentially until kind of the middle of next season. They need somebody. You know, Mikel Merino is doing a very good job, but it's fair to say, talking about these tactical scenarios, he certainly does not offer that threat in behind that a Havertz or a Gyokeres does, and that inhibits what Arsenal can do. You know, it reduces their flexibility in attack. So something's got to give this summer.
And you used the word hope there, and you've obviously listened to John and JJ break down Gyokeres' potential move to Arsenal, but who do you hope is fulfilling that number 9 position as an Arsenal fan next season?
Well, I changed my mind. By the time this comes out, I've probably changed my mind.
Okay, caveats.
But
disclaimers.
I think Alexander Isak is the best footballer. I think Viktor Gyokeres is maybe the most proven goal scorer. And despite that, I think I'm going to say Benjamin Sesko. The reason being, I think Arsenal need to, in some respects, learn from the lessons of letting Alexander Isak join Newcastle a couple of years ago. They were very interested in him. The January before he joined Newcastle, he had a buyout clause at that time. You have to forgive me, but it was in the region of kind of 70 million euros. And Arsenal looked at it and thought, is he ready? Is he the guy? Is he going to make an immediate impact? And ultimately, they missed out. And I think Isak's gone to a level now, and certainly a price tag, especially if we look at it in Mario Kart terms, where I think realistically he's probably beyond Arsenal. You know, they've got other areas of the squad that need attention, that need to be addressed. I think of holding midfield, backup goalkeeper, potentially the wide areas. So I think spending £150 million on one player is not realistic. With Gyokeres, the goal scoring record is there. I do have concerns about the transition between the leagues. I do have concerns about the style. That stat that JJ highlighted of one-headed goal, that seems like a very contrasting style in terms of the goals he's scoring to what Arsenal play with. And there's another aspect in this, which is the age, right? Gyokeres will be 27, I think, this summer. Benjamin Sesko is 21. Okay, he's not a specialist at this point in time. He's not an elite goal scorer at this point in time, but I think he's the one potentially with the most potential for growth. I think he's the one who we could be looking at in 3 or 4 years and saying, this is an elite striker. And I think Arsenal need to get on that now and take that leap this summer and look at it as a development opportunity and a really sensible investment. So they all have their merits. But right now, that's the one that I'm kind of looking at thinking, I think that's the best fit. And my sense is that you guys kind of feel the same.
Yeah, I think the Šeško one makes sense because it fits Arsenal's play style now, but gives them the potential to move into maybe a bit more of a consistent creation through the middle approach as well. So yeah, I would go with Šeško.
I don't want Newcastle to lose him, but Isak is one of the best players you could possibly get, and he would up the level. So it has to be. I would say that. Yeah.
But isn't the issue is with Isak, like you say, is that he's just impossible to get, right? So surely the best available option then becomes Šeško.
There we have it. Sesko, a happy medium.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.